I didn't think losing 10 feet of gravel would turn into the most personal fight of my life, but that's exactly what happened. One day I had a driveway I'd used for 8 years. The next day it had fresh asphalt on it, a fence cutting it in half, and a neighbor smiling like he owned the place. And the worst part wasn't even the land. It was the way he looked at me, like I was supposed to just accept it. I live on a corner lot in a quiet little neighborhood outside Columbus, the kind of place where people wave without thinking about it, where trucks sit in driveways because folks actually work for a living, where nobody really bothers anybody. My place isn't anything fancy. 2 bedrooms, detached garage, gravel driveway that wraps along the side, wide enough for my truck, my trailer, and whatever job I've got lined up that week. I run a small landscaping business. Nothing huge, just me, a couple part-timers, and a lot of early mornings. That driveway, it wasn't just convenience, it was how I made my money. I bought the house back when prices were still reasonable, fixed it up myself over time, planted a few trees out front, kept things neat. I wasn't the guy with the nicest lawn on the block, but I wasn't the guy dragging the place down either. I minded my business, helped out when folks needed it, and in 8 years, I never had a single problem with any neighbor, not one. Then the new couple moved in next door. Their names were Caleb and Monica Whitmore. They bought the place for way more than it was worth, which already told you something about how they saw things, not as a home, but as an investment, a statement. Within a week, there were contractors everywhere, new siding, new windows, some kind of imported stone for the walkway, the works. Their cars showed up next, 2 identical black SUVs that looked like they'd never seen a dirt road in their lives. At first, I figured, hey, new neighbors, new energy, maybe they'll settle in. I even waved the first time I saw Caleb outside. He gave me this quick nod, barely eye contact, like he was acknowledging a parking meter. Monica was worse, always dressed like she was about to go somewhere important, always holding a coffee cup she never seemed to drink from, always scanning the street like she was judging it. One morning, I overheard her talking on the phone while standing in their driveway, saying something about the neighborhood having potential if people took better care of their properties. And I remember glancing at my truck, my trailer, the stacks of mulch bags I had lined up for a job, and thinking, yeah, she's talking about me. Still, I kept it polite. That's just how I am. The first real sign of trouble came about 2 weeks in. I got back from a job around noon, pulled into my driveway, and saw 3 bright orange cones sitting right along the edge of the gravel, but not on their side. On mine. I remember just sitting there in the truck for a second, engine idling, trying to figure out if I was missing something. Maybe a utility marking, maybe a mistake. But no, those cones were placed deliberately, in a straight line, about 10 feet into my driveway. I got out, walked over, and just stared at them. Then looked at their yard, then back at mine. No note, no explanation, just cones, like someone had drawn a line and decided that was that. So I picked them up and moved them, set them neatly back on their lawn, right along their edge, figured that was the end of it. It wasn't. About an hour later, there's a knock at my door. I open it, and there's Caleb, standing there with this tight little smile, hands in his pockets like he's trying to look casual. Hey there, he says, voice all friendly but just a little too rehearsed. I noticed you moved the cones. Yeah, I said. They were on my driveway. He tilts his head, still smiling. Well, we were actually thinking that section could be shared. You've got a lot of space, and we're planning to have guests over pretty regularly. It just makes sense. I remember blinking at him, thinking, is this guy serious? It's not shared, I told him, calm but firm. That's my property. That smile, it didn't disappear right away. It sort of tightened. Right, he said slowly. But property lines can be flexible, especially in older neighborhoods. We're just trying to make things more functional. I leaned against the doorframe, crossed my arms. I've got a survey. It's not flexible. There was a pause, just a second, but you could feel it. Then he gave a small shrug, like none of it mattered. Well, he said, we'll see. And just like that, he turned and walked away. Now, I've been around long enough to know when someone's not done, when that "we'll see" isn't a throwaway line. It sits with you, like a storm you can't quite see yet, but you know is coming. For the next few days, things were quiet. Too quiet, honestly. No more cones, no more conversations. Just the sound of construction next door, hammers and saws, trucks coming and going. I kept working, kept my routine, but in the back of my mind, Something didn't feel right. Then came Friday. I had an early job that morning, left before sunrise, didn't get back until late afternoon, and the second I turned onto my street, I knew something was off. There was a paving truck parked in front of my house. At first, I thought maybe they were working on the road, but as I pulled closer, my stomach dropped. The fresh asphalt, it wasn't on the street. It was on my driveway. Not all of it, just a section. About 10 feet wide, running straight from their driveway into mine, smooth black against my gravel like a scar. And that wasn't even the worst part. Because right along that new strip, there was a fence. A clean, white, decorative fence, sitting a good 8 feet into my property, cutting off access like it had always been there. I parked the truck, got out slow, just staring at it, trying to process what I was seeing. The smell of fresh asphalt still hung in the air. The gravel I'd packed down over years, buried under it. For a second, I honestly wondered if I'd lost my mind, if I was remembering the property line wrong. But I wasn't. I knew exactly where it was. And they'd crossed it. I walked straight up to their front door, didn't even knock gently, just firm, 3 knocks. A moment later, Monica opens it, holding a glass of wine like it's the middle of a party. She looks at me, takes in my face, and I can tell right away she knows. Yes, she says, calm as anything. Your husband paved over my driveway. I say, keeping my voice steady, and put a fence on my property. She doesn't even flinch, just takes a sip of her wine, sets the glass down on a table behind her. Caleb had a survey done, she says, almost bored. That section belongs to us. And right there, I felt something shift. Because it wasn't just about the land anymore. It was the lie, said so casually, like they expected me to just accept it. I looked her dead in the eye. That's not what my paperwork says. She gives a small smile, not friendly, not polite, something colder. Then maybe, she says, you should check it again. And that's the moment I realized this wasn't going to be a misunderstanding. This was a decision, one they'd already made. And now it was my move. I didn't slam her door, didn't raise my voice. I just stood there for a second longer than was comfortable, nodded once, and walked back to my truck like I had all the time in the world. But inside, everything was already moving fast. Because when someone lies that clean, that calmly, it means they've already convinced themselves they're right. Or worse, that it doesn't matter if they are. That night, I dug out every document I had. The original deed, the survey from when I bought the place, even the county plot map I'd printed years ago and shoved in a folder. Spread it all out on the kitchen table, turned on that one overhead light that makes everything feel more serious than it is, and I checked. Then I checked again. The line was exactly where I remembered it. Not even close, either. That fence. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a decision to take. I even called the surveyor who did the original work, an older guy named Frank, been doing it longer than I've probably been alive. He still had my file. Told me straight up, if what you're describing is accurate, they're over your line by at least 8 feet. No hesitation, no maybe. So I called Caleb the next morning. He answered on the third ring, voice casual like we were talking about the weather. Hey, what's up? What's up? I said, keeping it even. Is you've got a fence and asphalt on my property. I checked my survey. You need to remove it. There was a pause, then a soft chuckle. Not surprised. Not defensive. Just amused. We had our own measurements done, he said. Everything's where it should be. That's not what a licensed survey says. Well, he replied, then I guess you should talk to a lawyer. And just like that, click. No argument. No discussion. Just dismissal. That's when it became clear. This wasn't about confusion. This was about leverage. They thought I wouldn't push back. Maybe they figured I didn't have the time, or the money, or the patience to fight it. Maybe they looked at my truck, my work clothes, my gravel driveway, and decided I wasn't the kind of person who files lawsuits. And for a day or two, I'll be honest, I thought about letting it go. Not because they were right, but because fighting something like that, it costs. Time, money, stress, all of it. But then Monday morning came. I had a job lined up, needed to hook up my trailer, and for the first time in 8 years, I couldn't back it out the way I always did. That fence cut off my angle just enough to make it a problem. I had to reposition, inch by inch, wasting 20 minutes on something that used to take 2. And standing there, sweating, already behind schedule. I looked at that white fence sitting on my land like it belonged there. And that was it. I called a lawyer that afternoon. Now legal stuff, it moves slow. Papers get filed, notices get sent. Weeks turn into months. And while all that was getting started, Caleb and Monica, they just kept going. They used that strip like it had always been theirs. Every evening, Caleb would pull one of those SUVs right onto the asphalt, smooth as you please, like he was parking in his own private extension. Weekends, they had people over. Nice cars lining up, folks stepping out, walking right across my land without a second thought. At one point, they even installed these little landscape lights along the edge of the asphalt, soft yellow glow at night, like they were highlighting their work. And one evening, as I was loading up my trailer, Caleb walks over, hands in his pockets again, same posture as before. "Hey," he says, nodding toward my trailer. "Mind keeping that a little further back? It's kind of blocking the view from our side now." I just stared at him. "You're serious?" I asked. He shrugged, "Just trying to keep things looking nice." That was the moment. Not the fence, not the asphalt. That was the moment something in me stopped trying to be the reasonable one. Because you can deal with someone who's wrong. It's a lot harder to deal with someone who's wrong and comfortable. So I started thinking, not about revenge, not exactly, more like balance. Because here's the thing, they hadn't actually taken ownership of that land. Not legally, not on paper, which meant, as far as the law was concerned, it was still mine. Fence or no fence. And if it was mine, I could use it. That idea sat with me for a couple days, turning over in my head while I worked. Measuring, planning, figuring out what would make a point without crossing a line I couldn't defend. Then Tuesday morning came. I had a mulch delivery scheduled for a client. A big order, more than I needed to keep on site. Normally, I'd have them dump it closer to the garage, but that day, I gave the driver different instructions. "See that strip there?" I said, pointing right at the fresh asphalt, just inside the fence line. "I want it right there." The driver looked at me, then at the fence, then back at me. "You sure?" "Yep," I said. "Right there." He shrugged and did it. The sound of that mulch hitting the ground, heavy, steady, building into a pile, it was oddly satisfying. Dark brown against that perfect black asphalt, spreading out until it covered the entire stretch. Didn't take long. By the time he pulled away, that new driveway was completely blocked. I didn't even have to wait. Caleb came out in a bathrobe, hair still messy, phone in his hand like he'd just woken up, and this was the first thing he saw. "What the hell is this?" he demanded, walking up to the fence. "Mulch," I said, like it was obvious. "You're blocking our driveway." I leaned against my truck, wiped my hands on a rag. "No, I'm using my property." He pointed at the pile, frustration rising. "We can't get our cars out." I nodded slowly. "Sounds inconvenient." For a second, I thought he might climb that fence. Instead, he just stood there, jaw tight, trying to figure out his next move. "You need to move that," he said finally. "I will," I replied, "when I need it." And then I turned around, went back to what I was doing. That mulch sat there for 3 days. 3. Long enough for their guests to park on the street instead of their precious extension. Long enough for Monica to leave a handwritten note on my door about community standards and mutual respect. Long enough for Caleb to stop pretending this was temporary. But I wasn't done. Because here's the thing about people like that. They don't learn from one inconvenience. They rationalize it. They wait it out, thinking eventually things will go back to how they want them. So I made sure it didn't. The second delivery came that Friday. 10 tons of gravel. Now gravel. That's a different kind of presence. Louder when it lands, sharper edges, harder to move. And again, I gave the same instruction. "Right there," I told the driver. This time, there was no hesitation. The pile grew bigger than the mulch had been, spilling wider, heavier, completely swallowing that strip, pressing right up against the fence. I could feel the tension before Caleb even came outside. When he did, he wasn't in a robe this time. He was dressed, phone already in his hand. "I'm calling the police," he said. I nodded. "Go ahead." And he did. About 20 minutes later, a patrol car pulls up. Officer steps out, calm, takes a look at the scene. The gravel, the fence, me, Caleb pacing like he's about to explode. "What seems to be the issue?" the officer asks. Caleb jumps in first. "He's blocking our driveway. This is harassment." The officer turns to me. "Sir." I walk over, grab the folder I'd already set aside, hand him my survey. He looks at it, takes his time, then walks over to the fence, measures it with his eyes, compares. Then he turns back to Caleb. "Sir," he says, calm as can be. "This appears to be his property. Caleb throws his hands up, but he's blocking access. The officer pauses just long enough. Then, he says, "You probably shouldn't have built on it." Silence. Just silence. And in that moment, for the first time since all this started, I saw it. That little crack in Caleb's confidence. That crack didn't turn into an apology, not even close. If anything, it made things colder. After the officer left, Caleb didn't yell, didn't threaten. He just gave me this long, quiet look like he was recalculating everything, then turned and went back inside without another word. And honestly, that was worse. Because now it wasn't about proving he was right. It was about not losing. A couple days later, I got served. He filed a lawsuit, claimed I was interfering with access, damaging shared property, creating a nuisance, all dressed up in legal language that tried to turn his mistake into my fault. I remember standing there on my porch, papers in hand, reading through it once, then again, and just shaking my head. Because now we were officially doing this. So I called my lawyer, told him to go ahead and file the counterclaim. Property encroachment, unauthorized construction, damages, legal fees, the whole thing. And while that process started moving, slow, steady, like it always does, I decided I wasn't quite done making my point. The third move came the following week. Now, I had a crew scheduled for a larger job, 2 guys helping me out, long days, lots of material moving in and out. Normally, I wouldn't bother with it, but for bigger projects, sometimes I rent a portable toilet just to keep things efficient. Did I need to put it where I did? No. Did I put it there anyway? Yeah, I did. Bright blue. Can't miss it blue. Dropped right along the property line, on my side. Of course, positioned perfectly so that if you were standing on their brand new asphalt, it was the first thing you saw. The delivery guy even chuckled when I pointed to the spot. "You sure about that location?" "Never been more sure," I said. And when Caleb came out and saw it, man, that was something. He didn't even speak at first, just stared at it like his brain couldn't process what he was looking at. Then he looked at me. "You've got to be kidding me." I shrugged. "Work requirement. That is completely unnecessary." "Maybe," I said, "but it's still my property." Monica came out behind him, took one look, and just covered her mouth like she couldn't believe what her life had become. "This is unbelievable," she said. "Do you have any idea how this looks?" I glanced at the porta-potty, then back at her. "Yeah," I said, "kind of like building a driveway on someone else's land." That one landed. They went back inside, and after that, things got quiet again. No more conversations. No more fake smiles. Just legal filings, scheduled dates, and that weird tension you can feel even when nobody's saying a word. Weeks passed. The mulch was gone by then, used up on jobs. The gravel had been spread out where I needed it. But the fence, that stayed. The asphalt, still there. And that porta-potty, well, that stuck around longer than it needed to. Eventually, the court date came. Now, I'm not going to pretend I was completely relaxed walking into that courtroom. Doesn't matter how right you are, there's always that little voice in the back of your head asking what if. What if something gets missed? What if they twisted just enough? What if this drags out longer than you can afford? But I had my paperwork. I had Frank, the surveyor, show up in person, old school guy in a button-down shirt, carrying copies of everything he'd done. And Caleb, he came in confident. Suit, briefcase, that same controlled expression like he was walking into a meeting he expected to win. The judge listened to both sides. Caleb's lawyer spoke first, talked about reasonable adjustments, assumed boundaries, mutual benefit, all these phrases that sounded nice until you actually looked at what had been done. Then my lawyer laid it out. Clean. Simple. No fluff. "This is the legal boundary," he said, pointing to the survey. "This fence crosses it by approximately 8 feet. This asphalt was placed without permission. My client has been denied full use of his property." Then Frank took the stand, explained his measurements, his methods, how the markers were still in place, how there was no ambiguity. He even brought photos from when the original survey was done. And then came the moment I didn't expect to matter as much as it did. The judge asked Caleb about his survey. There was a pause. Then his lawyer handed over a document. The judge looked at it, flipped a page, leaned back slightly. "Sir," he said, looking directly at Caleb, "who conducted this survey?" Caleb hesitated. I took the measurements myself." "With what?" "A tape measure." There it was. Not a licensed professional. Not an official document. Just him, deciding where the line should be. The judge set the paper down, and you could feel the shift in the room. The ruling didn't take long. Full restoration of my property, removal of the fence, removal of the asphalt, reimbursement for legal fees, and a clear statement that what had been done wasn't a misunderstanding. It was an overreach. Just like that, it was over. Or at least, the official part was. A week later, contractors were back, but this time, they were undoing everything. The fence came down first, piece by piece, that clean white line disappearing like it had never belonged there. Then the asphalt, cut out, hauled away, leaving the gravel underneath exposed again. I stood there watching part of it, leaning against my truck, not saying anything. Caleb didn't come outside. Monica did. Once looked over, then quickly looked away. No apologies. No acknowledgement. Just distance. And honestly, that was fine. Because at the end of the day, I got my land back. I got my access back. I got the thing that actually mattered for my work, my routine, my life. But the part that stuck with me wasn't the win. It was how fast things escalated over something that could have been a conversation. All they had to do was ask, not assume, not take, not build first and justify later. Just ask. Maybe I would have said no, but at least we would have stayed neighbors. Instead, we became something else entirely. Now we live side by side like strangers who know too much about each other. We don't talk. We don't wave. And that little stretch of gravel between our houses, it's just a driveway again. Nothing special. But I notice it every single day, because now I know exactly what it costs to keep it. And I'm curious what you think, because I've gone back and forth on this more than I expected. Yeah, they were wrong. No question about it. But did I take it too far with everything I did after? The mulch, the gravel, the porta potty. Was that fair, or was I just playing their game in a different way? Let me know in the comments. Would you have handled it differently, or would you have done the same thing, or worse? And if you want more real stories like this, neighbors, property lines, all the messy stuff people don't talk about, go ahead and hit like, subscribe, and stick around, because trust me, this kind of thing happens more than you think.